we're going to talk about today is an overview of conflict. I want to look at some of the characteristics of conflict, especially for those of us who are involved in any kind of a resolution context. It's nice to know a little bit about what it is we're dealing with, its characteristics, so we can respond more appropriately. We're going to look at several aspects of conflict in terms of an overview. We're going to look at its image. What's the image of conflict? We're going to talk about its causes. We're going to cover the dynamics that are associated with conflict, look at its depth, how deep does it go, impact that conflict can have on various settings, and management of conflict. So let's jump in. Let's start with image. Mainly when we think about conflict, we think about the negative aspects of conflict, the consequences that we all have experienced, no matter who the audience is. I can ask the audience, has anybody ever had any conflict? Yes. Somebody who might think they haven't had, I think, oh, my life's going pretty well. Well, you got to ask them, has anybody ever had any parents in the room? Everybody has had parents. Everybody has conflict with their parents. Or those that are older in the room, has anybody ever had kids? Anytime you have parents and kids, you're going to have conflict. So we're very experienced when it comes to conflict, various levels, ages. And then if you have a job, do you have a boss? Do you work somewhere? You know conflict. So we all have an experience, a universal experience with conflict. And most of it is negative. When we think about conflict, it's the first thing that pops into our mind. What are some of the negative things associated with conflict? What do we think of? What kind of words come to mind when we talk about conflict in any kind of a setting? Here's a list of some of the ones we typically get. Negative. Image, hostility, frustration, strife in a workplace. Or how about rage? I mean, that's a strong one. Sometimes conflict can get that far, that deep. Stress in an environment as well, in a workplace or at home, where maybe there's not a whole lot being said. It may not be vocal or verbalized or acted out, but there's a carrying of stress, anxiety in the atmosphere and the environment. Another negative, fighting. Arguing, sometimes maybe physical fighting as well, depends on where the context is, but arguing certainly back and forth. Ooh, what about grudges, right? Looking for somebody's going to, you treated me this way, you said this, you said that, arguing back and forth. Getting hurt. Conflict often leads to feelings of hurt, of pain. Somebody says something that maybe they even wish they hadn't have said, but it creates a hurt feeling. What else? Revenge. What about in a situation where, particularly a workplace, okay, yeah, you may have won that battle, right? Management won. But does the employee have any recourse? Certainly. Might there be revenge in the back or reprisal on the part of management to the employee if the employee wins? So there's this atmosphere that can be created by those negative aspects of conflict. What about destruction? Ruined relationships, ruined productivity, ruined teams in an entire organization sometimes because of conflict, hatred. Sometimes we carry these things with us a long, long time. Relationships are gone forever. Sometimes people who are just completely out of our lives, we still harbor these bad thoughts about them, frustrations, and antagonism. Little barbs back and forth, right? Things may be going okay, but there's an antagonistic atmosphere. All of these are negative images associated with conflict, and we're all very familiar with. But conflict isn't just negative. There's also a positive image associated with conflict that we don't often think about. If I were to ask you, give me some words associated positively that are a result of conflict. Such as, I tried this the other night with my high school daughter and my middle school daughter. When you get in a fight with your friends, does anything good come out of it? Have you ever been in a conflict situation, regardless of how negative it was or painful it was, where something good came out of it? When we try to list positive words, here's what the list often looks like. It includes words like growth. Oftentimes, conflict is the catalyst for growth. We're different afterwards. Listening. Suddenly, say in marriage relationships. There can be a fight, an argument, but the result afterwards is better listening or feeling heard as a result that maybe hadn't happened before. Actually, it depends on the fight and who you're fighting with, but I won't go into any personal illustrations there. What about increased intimacy? No personal illustrations there either, but oftentimes, right, it's the make-up after the fight that really makes the fight worth it. Have you ever gotten into a fight just so you could make up afterwards? Anyways, there can be increased intimacy as a result of the conflict, again, depending on who you're arguing with. Listening can be a result, right? Hearing better, learning more about the other person, learning about their feelings, their perspective. What about trust? Increased trust after a fight? Nothing like having a good argument, knock down, drag out, that now you know this person a little bit better. Oftentimes trust can be improved. Communication can be improved. Better communication. We've maybe changed things in the organization, changed some policies or practices that have increased communication as well as maybe productivity. Understanding. I know a little bit more about you. I didn't know your culture did that. I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't understand this was a consequence of that behavior or that response or that attitude. So understanding maybe of each other, but my own individual understanding could improve and increase. Cooperation between everybody or a team member, or cooperation at home, cooperation between employee, employer. Cooperation can come out of harmony. Harmony can be the result of conflict. There are positive things that can be associated, a result of conflict. Strength, friendship, which was the one they mentioned with my kids, both of them. The number one thing they mentioned as a positive result out of conflict was friendship. Yeah, they fight. Yeah, they argue. But they come away friends, maybe even stronger friends. Unity, increased awareness. So what we're talking about is conflict nobody wants to have. We would rather live our lives, if we could, without conflict. Many people live their lives with conflict avoidance. However, some of the best things we have in our lives were prefaced, or conflict was a catalyst for those things. So conflict has an interesting dichotomy about it. It's negative. Nobody wants it. If we could live without it, we think we would be happy. However, notice in our trade, no one ever talks about conflict elimination. It's conflict management. It's conflict resolution. It's not conflict elimination. Life would be very boring, very sterile if there was no conflict at all. So it's got this negative aspect that hurts. It's got a potential to create incredible harm, but it also has this other potential. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we take the shattered threads of conflict and weave it into something positive and productive? How do we move from the negative column to the positive column? I don't know. I know the two possibilities exist, but I can't tell you or give you a way or a technique or a style that's going to produce positive things out of every conflict. I don't think anybody can. But the potential is there, which creates for us a possibility of maybe a better awareness. So let's talk about, from image, let's talk about some of the causes now. If we could better understand the causes, maybe it could help us move more to the positive realm. Causes of communication. Causes of conflict. Miscommunication can be one of the causes. You say something, I didn't hear it right, we didn't communicate well, you said, and I took it another way. Miscommunication. And if you recall, when we talked about in our communication segment, it's amazing that we communicate at all. There's always filters. There's always different baggage that we bring to this. So if you remember the communication loop, the communication cycle, you've got this external behavior with body language, and then it's interpreted, creating an internal response which creates another external behavior. So miscommunication is a huge, probably most consistent cause of conflict. What about misunderstanding? Let's lump in here too stereotyping, or just plain misinformation, or even ignorance. Misunderstanding can cause. We are in a multicultural society now in a workplace, where, especially in America, where we go, people we spend time with. We don't know everything about all the cultures that are out there. So the increased possibility and potential for misunderstanding someone, a gesture, a thought, eye contact, where in this culture eye contact can be insulting. Someone on the other side of the table from another culture who's working hard to adapt themselves to work in, say, a predominantly American environment, maybe doing things that we find or think are offensive. So misunderstanding can be a huge cause of conflict. What about ineffective management styles? Have you ever been in a context of ineffective management styles? How many times have we seen people elevated to the height or level of their incompetency? They're trying, they're learning, they're working on it. But oftentimes the consequences of what they haven't learned can be very powerful, very dangerous in a work environment. So ineffective. You can take somebody who's got all the enthusiasm. Maybe they've done everything well prior projects, but now you've elevated them, given them a staff management position. Now they've got a staff that they're working with, and they just aren't coping very well. Ineffective management styles cause conflict. Unclear roles and expectations. Oh, I thought you expected this. I thought you wanted this. Oh, I thought I was supposed to be doing this. Well, here's what I expect of you, but it's not clear. Sometimes the model or the image that the person has in their head doesn't come out very well through their mouth or their language or their communication. Lack of quality or competence. People who just do a poor job. Contract situations where I expected this is the project definitions, you were supposed to, these were the goals, you didn't perform up to the level and par. This can cause conflict. Standing on principle. People who will cut off their nose to spite their face. Standing on principle is a very difficult one to get around as a cause of conflict because people will be willing to sacrifice a great deal on principle. Right? Well, I didn't do anything wrong. It's the principle of the thing. Well, I'm not going to look bad kind of situation, which can only escalate or often cause more conflict. What about lack of resources? I haven't been in any federal agency or any group or organization that has all the resources they need, either in personnel or material or time. And it creates a competition that will cause conflict. Lack of resources. Well, we can't get this done on time. All of us are in a position now where we are having to do more with less. And that can cause stress in the environment, antagonism, all those kind of negative aspects that can create conflict. And what about lack of security? Just plain old-fashioned fear can cause conflict. Work environment where rifts are predominant or even rumored can cause an anxiety. And this low-level stress that's constantly present in an atmosphere. And I don't care what kind of team building skills you have. I don't care how many project goals that you've set and everyone's clear on the communication expectations and roles. If you've got an environment where security is risk, where there's a fear of one's job, that livelihood could be lost, you're going to see an increase in conflict. People get edgy. So these are not all, certainly not all of the causes of conflict, but these are some that we are most familiar with, that are easy for us to talk about and better understand some of the characteristics of conflict. Let's move from causes to its dynamics. What happens once a conflict starts? You say something to me, I get upset. I say something to you, you get upset. Some sort of expectation. Regardless of the cause, it now starts to take on a life of its own. It starts with feelings beginning to intensify. You've said something, I didn't like it. Hurt my feelings, maybe. And now I've got this feeling, and it's a strong feeling. I'm mad at you. I'm frustrated with you. I'm afraid of you, whichever one it is. This feeling is there. It's growing, and I have to find a way to deal with it. One of the ways to deal with it is to frame it, and we end up then positioning ourselves. Well, if they hadn't said that, then I wouldn't feel this way, and if you hadn't acted that way, then this would have never happened, and it's all your... I'm starting to clarify and define and set a clear and hardened position. And one way I begin to do that is start to build coalitions. I'm walking around telling people, guess what happened to me? Guess what she said? Guess what he did? And now I'm looking for folks to say, no, really, I can't, but well, I'd be upset too. And of course, I'm going to frame the incident, from my perspective. So yeah, there's going to be sympathy, there's going to be compassion, and I'm starting to build coalition. That only increases those hardened positions. I'm getting feedback. Yeah, I would feel that way too. Now I start to harden that position, which sets up the next step. I start to dehumanize. That person that did this to me wasn't right, wasn't fair. But typical of management, or typical of employees to be irresponsible, late, not really take ownership in the company, that sort of thing. Or it's typical of management to only be looking out for themselves, climbing up that ladder, right? I'm starting to lump them together with characteristics of larger groups. It's no longer a single person on the other side. It's easier to dehumanize someone if we can lump them together in a single group, kind of a faceless group, and associate them with all the negative aspects of that group. So we begin to dehumanize them, take away their personal, individual self, which allows us to punish. It's easier to punish somebody who's not a person. So this desire to punish begins to emerge. And how many different ways, how many socially acceptable ways are there to punish people in the office, in the workplace? Can employees punish their supervisors? Can supervisors punish employees in socially acceptable ways? Sure they can. Employees can work slower, leave out vital information, be a pain in the neck. Well, I don't understand. I got another question. They're in your office 80,000 times a day asking a question. Could you help me with that? I don't just right. Well, other times they were very efficient employees. Now all of a sudden they're a pain. Why don't they go away? They're just annoying. Annoying can be a way to punish. What about management? Can they give that particular job that nobody wants to that employee? Punishment emerges. That we have many, many ways, not just in the workplace, even at home. Stop talking to each other, passive-aggressive behavior, punishment, the desire emerges. And it's easier to do as this dynamic increases. And then the last step, communication deteriorates. We're not talking to each other at all, is probably the worst case scenario. But in a workplace, that might not be well. Certainly we're not talking in productive ways. We're not talking openly. We're not talking honestly. We're guarding ourselves. We're covering our backs. We're collecting those memos and filing them away because we're afraid that this might come back to bite us. So the communication is always stilted. It's always, I don't know, it's got a tone of mistrust about it. So these are the dynamics from a feeling of hurt, pain, all the way up to communication deteriorating until finally we actually pay somebody. We actually hire somebody to speak for us. My attorney will talk to your attorney. And then these two folks maybe go to a third party and they talk to a judge or an administrative law judge or an arbitrator or someone who will make a decision. And we're just sitting on the sidelines. The conflict has gotten way out of hand, even out of our power and our responsibility. So these are the dynamics. Let's look at the depth associated with conflict. Conflict has a depth about it. What we are most familiar with, especially those involved in any kind of resolution context or setting, are the issues. And oftentimes when we sit two people down, we want to get the issues. Let's find out what the issues are. Let's pin this thing down. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more going on in any conflict because there are at least two people, at least two personalities involved that creates this depth. If you have more than one person, and once you start developing these coalitions, you've got this depth multiplied on multiple layers and dimensions. So you can see this depth can get really out of hand in terms of feeding or even starting to define a characteristic of a conflict. But look at this. But beyond issues, we've got the personalities. And we're going to talk about styles in another setting. People bring their styles and temperaments to it. Bring that to a conflict. They can't leave that at the table. So personalities become involved. Emotions, certainly, and how people deal with and handle their own emotions, express their emotions. We've talked about in another setting where that imbalanced personal state, where emotions are pushed out or the intellect is pushed out. All of that becomes a part of the conflict. Individual needs, interests, and desires. On a personal level, my interest, my needs, my desires, but take it another step. What about a company or a team or a family's interests, needs, desires? This depth can just span out and become very complicated, very multidimensional. Self-perceptions, self-esteem. I'm going to approach you, I'm going to deal with this conflict, I'm going to respond to you primarily in the way I see myself. Do I see myself as empowered? Do I see myself with any options available? My self-esteem is going to define what this conflict is going to look like and how I'm going to respond to and deal with you. What about hidden expectations? It's a lot more going on here. Yes, my feelings were hurt, but especially, say, in a security situation where people are concerned about their livelihood. They're concerned if that paycheck is going to come tomorrow, or anything that's going on outside of the individual work environment. Say someone's sick, or there's surgery coming up, or there's a split up in another aspect, or sister-in-law, brother-in-law, who knows? Hidden expectations, hidden concerns that may never come to the table. And as far as issues are concerned, people may not even think about, what does this have to do with that? It could be a lot to do with it. And then unresolved issues from the past. How you deal with your mother, how you deal with your father. Experiences maybe from another job. Experiences from other relationships. All these things we bring to this moment in time. This whole aspect of who we are in all these dimensions. So there's a depth to conflict that if we just deal with the issues, may never actually get you to that point of developing the positive, weaving the threads, that this conflict could actually turn into something good, potentially for you, for me, for us, whether that's in a workplace or family setting. Great deal of depth. Don't forget that when you're dealing with people and when you're dealing with conflict and issues. Now let's look at the impact conflict can have. Impact conflict can have, first of all, is it can stall. Those negative aspects. It can stall productivity. Every manager, every organization, corporate, federal, everyone knows this. When there's conflict in the workplace, productivity drops. Energy is split. People are building coalitions. They're talking with each other. They're dealing with their own emotions, frustrations. They're taking this home. Now the wife's frustrated, or the husband's frustrated, or the children. They're bringing it back. You can't spread that energy out and still keep productivity. So it stalls. It holds things back. Relationships. Conflict stalls relationships. They can be locked down in a particular place and never move on. If something isn't done to deal with that, communication, let's stop and talk is the first thing we need to do. To reverse that dynamic process, we've got to open up those lines of communication so we can actually get back to those feelings. Relationships can be stalled. Now, relationships in a workplace. If I don't trust my boss, if I don't trust other employees, if I'm not willing to work, you can't set goals, you can't be enthusiastic, you can't create a growing environment. Relationships can be stalled, workplace and at home. Unless we start to deal with these, it can be stalled on a permanent basis. Relationships can get stuck. What about communication? Obviously, everyone knows this one. It stalls communication. We're no longer talking well. And when communication gets stalled, progress is stopped. Everything else is affected. So communication can be stalled. And unless we're communicating, we're not moving forward. We're never going to bridge that gap from the negative aspect images to the positive without communication and growth. Personal, individual growth can be stalled with conflict. People can be stuck in an incident in the past that will hold them to that point, and they may never reach the potential, the possibilities, the growth levels that are theirs, if they are stuck in something that has happened, it's never moved past, it's been stalled. It can happen individually. It can also happen with companies. I've seen it many times. Departments can be stalled, where you can look in a department and this group of people or this organization has not moved anywhere. They are stuck because of conflict. They can't get across that threshold to the places where this organization could be because they haven't dealt with it. The other thing, remember the negative and the positive? The impact of conflict has a stalling aspect, but it also has a revealing aspect. It can reveal a paradigm shift. Paradigm shift we think about, refer to a different way of looking at things, a new perspective, a new model, a model that could take maybe a new approach that pushes the organization past that threshold on a new way of doing things. A paradigm shift it can reveal. If you're stuck, maybe we need to look at things differently. Back up. Let's play with this for a while. Let's start doing some brainstorming. It raises the possibility it can reveal an emerging paradigm shift, whether it's in your office, with you individually, or out there on the cutting edge of the workplace. It may cause us in a conflict to look around, pay attention, what's going on, what's not being done, what is being done, who's doing it differently. Emerging paradigm shift. It can reveal also a problem to be solved, something we haven't dealt with yet. I was in a marriage seminar, marriage enrichment seminar one time, my wife and I, and it was very interesting. One of the first things they brought to our attention as a group was you realize that there are things as a couple that you will not talk about. There are defined areas that my wife and I, had decided we would not talk about. It was an unspoken agreement. Issues that, well, greeting cards is mine. And this annoys my wife to no end. She likes to send cards. She, Hallmark this, Hallmark that, Hallmark this. And I'm thinking, someone's getting rich off of this, right? Just send them a card. So what we had done was agreed not to talk about it. She would go off and get those cards and send them off. I would never know about it, and she would never talk to me, or I would never expect a card. We had agreed, unspoken, because this was an area of contention. It was a problem that we had decided not even to deal with or work with. So it was a problem not to be solved. So you can imagine those times when I forgot or did not send a card, say for anniversary, birthday. Are we talking conflict here? Okay, the problem that hadn't been addressed, a problem to be solved. So sometimes these agreements not to deal with things, the conflict points to a problem that needs to be solved. Once we sat down and talked about it, we worked it out, we can move forward. So sometimes conflict can reveal one of those things, personal levels and workplace levels, and an opportunity. Without making it sound too pie in the sky, conflict can offer opportunities. Opportunities for all the positive things we've mentioned earlier. And that opportunity can be taken or it can be lost. What I want you to see here in terms of impact, or that it has the potential of stalling, but it also has the potential to reveal. And unless we take the time to look at it both ways, we may miss something. So every time there's a conflict, you want to take the moment, step back and say, okay, should we be doing something differently? Let's see if there's anything this could be revealing to us. All right? So impact. We're going to talk about then what conflict is essential to. You cannot have any of these things without conflict. You are not going to have a partnership without a conflict. Conflict is going to be a catalyst. It's going to be an element. It's going to be a part of the communication style. Now, the impact that that conflict has is up to you and how we manage it, and that's what we're going to talk about next. You cannot have growth without conflict. You cannot have community without conflict. If you're ever invited to join a neighborhood or community or association and the rules and requirements are there's no conflict here, run away. That is not a good place to be. That community will not grow. Nothing's going to happen in that community. So you cannot have community without conflict. It's got to be there. What about effectiveness? What about intimacy? What about success? You cannot have success without conflict. So if conflict is a necessary catalyst for all of these things, then we may want to find ways to use that catalyst for these positive things. Find a way, pay attention, use some techniques. It doesn't mean that every conflict is going to produce success, but at least we know that the seeds of positive are there somewhere. Let's look for them. That's all we're saying. So then let's talk about management. How do you manage conflict then? Conflict is fundamentally a request for communication. Now, we have very dramatic, very exaggerated, very painful ways of delivering that request. It's fundamentally an issue of communication. We need to talk about it. You can't resolve a conflict positively if you're going to maintain any relationship without communication. You can eliminate one side of the party or never talk to that other side of the party, but remember that stalled, you end up not moving forward in many areas of your life. It's fundamentally a request for communication. Strong antagonistic issues, emotions, connections are evidence of value of the issues in the relationship. Okay? Let me say that again so you can catch that. Strong antagonistic emotions, responses, and connections are evidence of valued issues and relationships. Conflict is because people care about something. Whether it's interpersonal relationship or it's in the department, in the organization, someone is concerned about something that is very important to them, either it's issue or relationship. So that antagonism, those strong feelings, are evidence that this is important to them. Let me take it one step further. Oftentimes when we think about, and you hear the word used, in conflict, well, I hate you. The opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is indifference. I don't care. And indifference, and we'll flesh this out here in just a minute, indifference cannot support or maintain the energy necessary for conflict. People who, the community illustration, any community that does not have conflict is a group of people who care about nothing. If there's conflict in your workplace, it's because something that people care about that's important to them needs to be worked out or talked about. If nobody cared, there wouldn't be strong antagonistic responses, emotions, and connections. So conflict can be a definition or a description of connection, caring. The people who don't fight are the ones you need to worry about. We're going to look at styles in terms of negotiation later, but Thomas Kilmann offers a negotiation style profile that we're going to talk about later. But in there's two quadrants that you want to be concerned about: substance issues and relationship issues. And on that scale, where concern for substance drops to 0, I don't care about any policy, practices, goals, productivity, where this relationship is going, drops to 0. And concern for relationships also drops to 0. I don't care about you, I don't care about us, I don't care about the family, or I don't care about anybody at work or you as a manager, any of that. You have indifference. And that creates a negotiation style of I don't care. It's called avoidance. People walk away. So don't be so disappointed in the conflict that's happening. The alternative isn't conflict elimination. It's not our goal. It's not what we want. The alternative is conflict resolution and conflict management, because conflict is a necessary element of all of our lives. So then, in terms of management, how can we address and look at effective management? What do I need to be paying attention to? What do I need to be doing? What can I bring to the table? In any management arena, there's only two things you have control of. Ever. You only have two things in your life that you have control of. One is yourself, and the other is your attitude. In controlling those two things, you have the foundation for managing conflict. Now, in controlling yourself, you define who you are, your character, your integrity. In controlling your attitude defines how you act. See, there's a misnomer out there. A lot of people, the first thing they'll say in a conflict situation is, he made me mad. She made me do that. It's a misnomer. You are the one in control of yourself and your attitude. No one can tell you what attitude to have. You decide that every single day when you get up, every single moment when you walk into any circumstance or situation. You control both, yourself, your attitude. So your character and your outlook, the two things that you bring to the table in terms of management. Everybody else in the room has the opportunity also to manage themselves and their attitude. But you can't control how they respond. You can't control their integrity, their character. They may respond poorly, but now it's up to you to respond in character and in attitude. Who are you and how do you act? Control those two things. I like this quote from Shad Helmstetter. Shad Helmstetter. True leaders have their own selves firmly in control. They are in command of their actions, their feelings, their attitudes, and their perspectives. The only thing you have control over is you. In summary, we look then at overview of characteristics, overview of conflict. We're trying to look then at some of the characteristics so we can have some insight into what it is, this thing that we are working with in terms of resolution or management. We've looked at that it has a positive and a negative image. We saw that it has a particular dynamic associated with it, and it also has a very particular depth that can take us many different directions. It has the power to stall, but it also has the power to reveal. And effective management begins with you, begins with me. And so in looking at overview, dealing with some of the characteristics of conflict, we've tried to lay a foundation for the skills that we're going to explore in the rest of this series.